Hi, hello, and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Ariana Jasmine, and today we will be reacting to another Piers debate. And this time he's with Norman Finkelstein and Alan Dershowitz. So we'll see how mad I get by the end of this debate, because every single Piers debate I watch, I feel like I lose more brain cells. But let's get into it. Make sure you like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this. And yeah.
My two guests are scholars with deeply opposing views, and a feud that's well documented, has its own Wikipedia page. But they've agreed to debate with this today with me over the ideas.
Damn, imagine your beef running so deep that you have a whole Wikipedia page dedicated to just cover the beef that you two have. And of course, Piers Morgan is capitalizing on it. You know what? I really don't like Piers Morgan, but you gotta hand it to the guy or his producer or whoever is scheduling these debates. They know how to drama farm. They are drama farming experts. Now, do I personally think Piers is smart enough to build that kind of a hustle? Not really. I think that's probably a producer in the back end giving out these ideas. Nonetheless, the hustle is hustling here.
Not the individuals. Author and political scientist, Professor Norman Finkelstein, and the lawyer and author of War Against the Jews and former Harvard law professor, Alan Dershowitz. Well, welcome to both of you. I thought we'd start this, because it's something that comes up all the time, where people say to me, it didn't start on October the 7th. And of course, I realise that the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians is not something that began just a few months ago. And you could argue it goes back thousands of years, but I'm not going to get into that part of the argument. What I want to do is take as a starting point for the modern era of conflict, 75 years of 1947, when the UK turned the Palestine problem over to the United Nations, who decided to split Palestine into two different countries. Let's take that as the catalyst for what has followed in the next 75 years. And what I want to do is give each of you, at the start, 2 minutes or so, to just outline what you think happened at the start that has basically been the catalyst for what follows. So Norman Finkelstein, let me start with you. Just outline from 1947, what happened then that you believe created really the problem that followed?
I think the problem that followed can be very easily summarized by two statements of the chief Israeli historian, Benny Morris. Statement number one, he said in his comprehensive history of the conflict, he states, one, that the fear of Arab displacement and dispossession was the chief motor of Arab resistance to Zionism.
Listen, I love Norman Finkelstein. I think he's done amazing things for the cause and the movement, but sometimes listening to him speak, he drags on his sentences, which I think for the older generation is fine, but when you're talking about like the younger generation, it's hard to stay, like, my mind is running wild right now listening to him speak. I do think he's a great person. I think he's very well educated. It's just like my brain starts playing ping pong, you know what I mean? Because he takes forever to finish a sentence.
His second statement is the idea of transfer, which is what the euphemism for expulsion. The idea of transfer was inbuilt and inevitable in Zionism. That, to me, is the starting point. The fear, the rational fear of the Palestinian people that should the Zionist idea be realized, it would result in their territorial dispossession and displacement. It's no different than the fear of our own, meaning the U.S., Native Americans, that the success of the Euro-American enterprise in the United States would be at the expense of our native population. The fear, the rational fear of territorial displacement and dispossession.
He cooked here because he made a great comparison here, and I think this is a great way to build relatability, especially with the American viewers, because you're giving an example that's very simple to understand but is also very relative. So he actually cooked. I take what I said back.
Alan Dershowitz, would you actually disagree with that in terms of an assessment of how this made Palestinians feel? And were they wrong to feel it?
I wouldn't yes, and yes, they felt it and they were wrong to feel it. I have to go back just 10 years earlier. 1947-48, the Peel Commission was set up by Great Britain. It recommended dividing the mandate into a tiny little sliver of land along the Mediterranean for a Jewish state where there was a Jewish majority, and the Jewish majority would determine how that was governed. The Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, the leader of the Palestinian people, rejected it. He said there's no such thing as the Palestinians, we're just greater Arabs, and we don't want there to be a Palestinian state. We just want there not to be a Jewish state. And then in 1948, the UN divided, again, giving the vast majority of the arable land, the land that's usable, to the Arabs. Again, the Israelis accepted it. The Arabs rejected it. Again, there was a Jewish majority in the area that was set aside for Israel. But the Arabs attacked in a genocidal war and tried to destroy Israel. The key point may have been motivated by fear is that the Arab and Muslim people desperately didn't want there to be a Jewish entity. For the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, it was religious, that under Islamic law, you can't give any land that was Muslim land over to a Jewish land. And then since that time, 1967, 2000, 2001.
I hate it when people turn this into a religious issue. And it's really a Zionist talking point because before any of this happened, first of all, Jews, Muslims, Christians all lived together cohesively in what used to be Palestine, now is occupied Palestine. They used to all live together cohesively. Second of all, you are using you are using the tool of religion to mask a bunch of really heinous shit that happened, and it's more an issue of indigenous land back, right? It's an issue of people getting pushed out of their own country, out of their own land. I just don't really think it's a great argument because, number one, you pit different religions against each other, which I honestly always think is a terrible idea, period. But second of all, you're negating the fact that all three of these religions used to live together cohesively under one country. And now it's broken up, it's apartheid. Some of them in the Gaza Strip are living under besiege, other ones are in, occupied West Bank. It's a shit show. And if you're just gonna say, oh, this was a religious battle through and through, you're completely negating everything that Palestinians went through.
Willing to accept a two-state solution, and every Arab leader has rejected it. And Israel abandoned the Gaza Strip in 2005, took out not only every living person, but every dead person who was buried, left behind hothouses and agricultural equipment.
We're getting a little bit ahead of where I want to get to at the start of this debate.
Sure.
You've outlined your response to what Norman said there. Norman, in 1948, we had the Nakba, the catastrophe, as Palestinians call it. It's because the UN couldn't get people to agree to the proposal. Israel declared itself a state. War broke out. Israel gained more land, I think this is uncontestable, than the UN originally assigned. And many Palestinians were forced out of their homes. It's also true that at the same time, many Israelis were forced out of, or many Jewish people were forced out of their homes in Arab countries. So there was a lot of displacement going on both sides. And I would ask you, if you look at that in totality, some people have said to me, if you actually go back to this period in time, both sides have a legitimate cause for complaint. Would you agree with that?
For fuck's sake, Piers. Honestly, the Nakba is uncontested to be one of the worst atrocities that has ever happened to Palestinian people. You're not about to two sides this. We're not about to all lives matter the Nakba, Piers.
I can't agree with that because we have to stick hard and fast to the factual record. The factual record is fairly clear on what happened in 1947 to 49 in the case of Israel and Palestine. Roughly 750,000 Palestinians from what became the State of Israel were either expelled or fled in fear and ended up refugees. Now, it's important to keep in mind, Piers, because you, and I think generously, agreed to talk about the background. Frankly, I think you're the first person I've noticed willing to talk about the background, that about 270,000 of those Palestinians who were expelled during the first Arab-Israeli war, they ended up in Gaza. So if we want to take the point as a point of departure, 1947 to 49, the point of departure for Gaza is exactly the same. That's how Gaza became Gaza. 70% of the population of Gaza became Palestinian refugees. Now, as to the question of what's sometimes called a population exchange between the Arabs who resided the Jews who reside in the Arab world versus the Arabs who resided in what became the State of Israel, there really isn't. I don't want to get involved now in a scholarly debate because it's simply not the time and place. But there isn't any good scholarship on what happened with those Arab Jews in 1948. Some, like the Yemeni Jews, everybody agrees they came willingly. The question of the Iraqi Jews, it's kind of a blur what happened. I'm not going to take one position or another on it. But I don't think those other aspects of the conflict ought to distract us from the fundamental question that you asked, and I think it's a very good question, to look at the background. And the background to what happened on October 7th, it began with the expulsion of about 300,000 Palestinians into Gaza, and now they comprise about 70 to 80% of the population of Gaza and their descendants.
Okay, well, Alan Dershowitz, you're disagreeing with what you're hearing there. Why?
Fundamentally, the Nakba was a self-imposed wound. Ben-Gurion, when he announced the establishment of Israel, welcomed all.
So the Palestinians just did the Nakba to themselves? They were just like, oh, you know what? Let me just displace myself into this small little strip that's completely besieged in an open-air prison because that's just what I'm going to do today. I feel gaslit by this old hag.
All the Arabs to stay. He didn't want to expel a single one. But the Arab countries engaged in a genocidal war designed to kill every Jew and destroy Israel. It was as a result of that invasion that Palestinians left or were expelled. Now, I happen to have studied the situation with Iraqi Jews because I was one of those people who helped draft Resolution 242 at the United Nations, and we looked at great detail into the history of Jews in places like Iraq. In Iraq, there was a Nazi pogrom during the Second World War, and there were additional pogroms in other Arab countries in which Jews had no choice but to leave. And there was an exchange of population, much as there were in Sudetenland, much as there were in Pakistan and India, and every other country in the world. The refugees were incorporated, assimilated into the society. But UNRWA, this horrible, horrible organization, was set up to keep the Arabs refugees, to keep them in camps, to make sure there was a festering wound. The Jews were integrated into society. No, they weren't first-class citizens in the beginning, but now they dominate the country. The same thing could have happened to the Arabs who left Israel. They could have been integrated into the surrounding countries. Instead, they were kept in camps. And
why do Palestinians have to leave their own land? And also, he's completely leaving out the hundreds and thousands of Palestinians that had to go to Jordan. And also, there's this constant notion when you listen to Zionists speak, and they're like, the Arab nations are why this happened. The Arab nations could have brought them in. The Arab nations did this, that, and the third. And it's really just placating on the war on terror and how Arabs are like these like demons and terrorists and oh, they're just ready to attack, So this idea, this notion that Palestinians should just be okay to give up their lands, but then, you know, it's like, why didn't the Arab countries take them in? I'm sorry, why is it the Arab countries' responsibility to take in Palestinians? Does America take on the responsibility of taking in South Americans or Haitians after everything they did to Haiti? No, they actually put Haitians on a one-way ticket back. They crossed the border even though they have the legal right to get asylum. They put them on a flight before they even get the hearing and they send them back. Even though we are the reason why Haiti is in the situation it's in. Well, America, France, Britain, etc. You get the point.
Told that they had to destroy Israel. They had to have a right of return. They had to go back. That history can't stop and you can't move forward. You have to only move backwards. So the sole fault for the refugees was the attack by the Arab countries designed to kill Israelis. That's when the expulsions and the leavings occurred.
And
so
Alan,
it's
before I
all
go
the fault of the
back
Palestinian
to
leadership.
before I go back to Norman for response to that, from your understanding, how many Jewish people were displaced from their homes in this early period? Because I've heard it was actually a lot.
It was between 700,000 and 800,000, with probably $1 trillion worth of wealth. These were people who had lived in these countries longer than the Muslims. They had lived there since the Babylonian exile 2,000 years earlier. They had been full citizens. They were dhimmis. They were second class because they were not Muslims, but they lived in peace. And once this happened, many were expelled. Some left voluntarily. I can see that to Mr. Finkelstein. But many left. About the same number were left voluntarily. Remember, too, with the Arabs, they were told to leave, and they would come back victorious after. In Haifa, for example, many of them wanted to stay, and many did stay. But the Arab leadership said, leave, we'll come back victorious, you'll have everything back. This is a complex situation. It's 75 years ago. There is a statute of limitations on things like this, a moral statute of limitations. Move on. Establish yourselves in the countries that you left and went to. Get rid of these refugee camps. Get rid of UNRWA and become full citizens of the countries you moved to, the way my grandparents became full citizens of the United States
let me go
after
to
pogroms had made them leave Poland.
Okay.
How do you want people in Gaza to leave? Because that's a part of the problem, right? Like, people aren't allowed to leave or go back. No, he really did say that. He said, you guys, we kicked you out. Deal with it. Deal with it. And you know, this whole like 2,000 year history is so interesting to me because guess what? The Persian dynasty ruled over a lot of the Middle East back thousands of years ago. Are you going to see me go to India and go up to someone's random house and say this is my ancestral homeland because of the Persian dynasty? No, because I'm not psychotic.
Come to Norman Finkelstein. Your response to that?
Okay, thank you, Piers. First of all, as a general point, I agree with the notion of a statute of limitations on your claims to a parcel of land. The first time I came across that expression was reading Arnold Toynbee's great history of the world, actually. And he makes the point in his history that isn't there a statute of limitation on the claims of Jews to Palestine? He said that claim was made 2,000 years ago. And it's claimed that, even today it's claimed that, based on what happened 2,000 years ago, there's a large portion of Israeli population who believes they have title to the West Bank, they have title to Gaza, because of that claim 2,000 years ago. Isn't there a statute of limitations? Allow me to complete my thought, and then you can disagree. Isn't there a statute of limitations on the claim from 2,000 to 3,000 years ago? Now, I want to focus on Gaza. I would like to focus on Gaza. The population is expelled from Israel into Gaza. Now, if you look at Benny Morris's history called Border Wars, he says that between 1949 and 1953, literally, listen closely, about 2,700 to 5,000 Palestinian expellees, that's including in the West Bank and in Gaza, between 2,700 and 5,000 Palestinian expellees were killed by Israel when they tried to return home. Now, Benny Morris says 90% of those killed were unarmed. They were what he called economic infiltrees who wanted to see their homes. They wanted to see their land. They wanted to see their neighbors. They were brutally, if you believe Professor Morris, brutally murdered between those years. In 1956, as you know, Piers, England, France, and Israel invaded Egypt, including at the time Gaza. What happened then? According to Benny Morris in the book Border Wars, he said between 470 and 500 Palestinian men were lined up and shot down. Now let's bear in mind, Piers, this is long, long before this entity called Hamas came into the picture. Now, if we fast forward to 1967, after Israel occupies Gaza, there are new assaults on the people of Gaza, this time carried on by, at the time, agricultural minister Ariel Sharon. Now, without getting sidetracked, I do have to say, Professor Dershowitz, every time I listen to you, even when we debated each other in 2003, I guess, or 2004, I can't recall, you keep escalating your claims about having written UN Resolution 242 or contributed to the resolution. Professor Dershowitz, I understand people have fantasies, and I understand that people have failings of memory as they get older. But Professor Dershowitz, when we had our original debate, you didn't even know who wrote UN Resolution 242. You had all these names. It was Lord Carradine. Anybody who was involved in the process would know that. So let's agree on one thing. We both of us, should agree to only state facts. And if we have any doubts about the facts, let's set them aside and try to give viewers, listeners, as accurate a record as possible. We can disagree. But when you engage in your fantasies, it really, to me, is very disturbing.
He said, I know you're old and decrepit, but when you engage in these fantasies, you're actually messing up, man. Stop doing that. He said it so eloquently, too. I think that's what really killed me, is the fact that he's saying it. You know, if you put him on mute, you think he's saying something normal. He's so eloquent and so tapered with the way he delivers what he's talking about. You can't even get mad because he's so respectful with the way he delivers it.
Disturbing and disorienting.
Okay. Well, let me ask Professor Dershowitz to respond.
Well, first of all, let's get the facts straight. I was Arthur Goldberg's law clerk. Arthur Goldberg was the United States representative to the United Nations. He asked me to come down. I actually moved in with him at the Waldorf Astoria Towers and work with him on 242. Yes, I confused the name Carrington with something else, but I worked closely. In fact, I was partly responsible for changing the words. I'm sorry. I worked on the matter. I didn't work with Lord Carradine. I worked with Arthur Goldberg. And together we managed to get rid of the word Palestinian before refugees in order to make sure that the...
By the way, kudos to Piers for for even caring about what this history is, unlike most Western news anchors. No. I'm so sorry, Sadie Princess. I'm gonna stop you right there. Please do not get it twisted. Piers Morgan does not give a shit. The fact of the matter is that these two have had historical beef. Their beef runs so deep that they even have a Wikipedia page on it, okay? So Piers Morgan does not care about the history. He does not care about Palestinian people. Piers is a views and ratings type of guy. He only cares about these two's history and how they have beef with each other and how he can milk it for views.
Resolution applied both to Palestinian refugees and to Jewish refugees from Farm. Well, now you're interrupting me. So let me finish. This is a detail. It's a fact. Now let's talk about what happened involving the Gaza Strip. I agree there's a statute of limitations. I'm opposed to any biblical claims on Israel. I believe Israel has a political and moral claim to the land. There have always been Jews living there from the time of Jesus and Muhammad to 1948. And wisely, the British decided for a compromise plan for division. And that plan was accepted by the Jewish and Zionist leaders. It was rejected by the Palestinians. And then, as you know, Israel tried to give the entire Gaza Strip over to Egypt, back to Egypt during the camp.
Why would Egypt be like, you know what, yeah, let me just take this small strip that doesn't even belong to me, is not even mine. Yeah, let me just govern over it while Israel is breathing down my neck. That's such an insane. He's like, we even offered it up to Egypt. No country would take the Gaza Strip because the Gaza Strip doesn't belong to them. So, Zionist ideology, when you actually sit down and listen to it, is just so wild. It's so insane. It's like, you guys can't actually believe this shit, right?
David Accords, it almost caused a breakdown in the Camp David meetings because the Egyptians didn't want it, and Israel very reluctantly held on to it. And then in 2005, Israel abandoned the Gaza. And only when rockets and a bloody coup occurred did Israel respond by having border controls. Let me tell you one thing. They weren't strong enough. If there had been better border controls, Hamas would not have been allowed to bring in concrete, which it used to build tunnels, to bring in weapons, which...
Yeah, just like Twinkle said, why would you accept a proposal that kicks you out of your house and gives it to some random foreigner? Why would anyone agree to a solution where they lose their land, they lose their ancestral home, everything that belongs to them, and they have to move away? Who in their right mind would accept that? You're telling me that the Arabs should just be okay with handing over their house because, I don't know, 2,000 some years ago, y'all lived there? Allegedly? Like, that's crazy.
It used to murder all these people on October 7th. So Israel was not strong enough. It should have had far better border controls, as other countries had in comparable situations. And so, one more point. Toynbee and Benny Morris both are regarded as kind of one-sided historians. There are claims that dispute both of them, particularly Toynbee. Toynbee was an overtly anti-Zionist historian who didn't believe that the Jewish people had any claim to Israel. There's also a statute of limitations on that. And so let's move forward. And moving forward means potentially a solution where Hamas is no longer in control of Gaza. Remember, too, you're absolutely right, Norman. Terrorism began way before Hamas. Terrorism was an essential part of the Palestinian leadership. The Olympic massacres that occurred way before Hamas, the terrorism on airplanes, the blowing up of airplanes, the hijacking of airplanes. The problem is that the world rewarded terrorism, and it's rewarding them.
Of course, the cherry on top of the whole entire Zionist ideology ice cream is terrorism. Terrorists, the Israelis are dealing with a bunch of terrorist Muslim Arabs from the Arab nations. Like, this worked 20 years ago. It worked 20 years ago, I'm not even gonna lie, which is why they think it's gonna work now. But honestly, it's crazy because this kind of logic does not work anymore. If he came on to Piers' show in 2001 and was like, the terrorists, yeah, it would have flown by. People would have listened to him. But now, people are actually understanding that Islam was not the issue. It's the occupation that's the issue. It's honestly the same trope. It's the same trope from 2001, the same war on terror trope. And it's just sad, you know?
Again, by allowing Hamas to free hundreds of people, legitimately many convicted, and not all convicted, many convicted, in exchange for a small number of completely innocent hostages. You can't compare completely innocent hostages with convicted murderers.
Okay. Look, Norman, respond to that, but also, I also want to move on.
Yes.
Once you've responded to it, also move on, if you will, to the issue of settlements, because one of the things I find hardest to have any sympathy with Israel about is the continued expansion of settlements.
I agree.
And in particular on the West Bank. And I think we may find some consensus here. But first of all, Norman, your response to what Alan Dershowitz just said, but also then move it to settlements.
Yeah, well, I would like to try to, well, actually, I can bring it up to the settlements on the case of Gaza. So I would like to just continue where I left off with, so to speak, at the risk of being boring, the timeline. I said in 1970, there were atrocities committed in Gaza against the people of Gaza by the headed by the agricultural minister at the time, Ariel Sharon. In 1987, as you perhaps remember, Piers, the first Intifada broke out. It was overwhelmingly, here I quote Benny Morris from his book, Righteous Victims, it was an overwhelmingly nonviolent civil resistance to the Israeli occupation. By 1990, 3 years after the beginning, or really 2 years, because it began on December 7, 1987, By 1990, Israel started to institute, again, I'm sticking strictly to Gaza, what it called a closure policy. And the closure policy was basically to seal off Gaza, okay? By 2002, 2003, if you read Baruch Kimmerling, he was a senior sociologist at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, he described Gaza as, quote, the largest concentration camp ever. Now, you might say Baruch Kimmerling was a person of the left, and I will grant that. But then we have Giora Eiland. Giora Eiland at the time was the head of Israel's National Security Council. He said in March 2003, and now I'm quoting him, he described Gaza as a huge concentration camp. So you can say there is a consensus among knowledgeable people, sociologists at the Hebrew University, head of the National Security Council, that Israel had turned Gaza into a concentration camp. In 2006, there was an election in January 2006. Hamas wins the election basically on the platform of reform, because the Palestinian Authority is proverbially corrupt. It comes into power. Immediately as it comes into power, Israel institutes this brutal economic blockade on Gaza. And at that point, there have been various descriptions. I'm sure, Piers, you wouldn't disagree. You wouldn't call The Economist a left-wing magazine or anti-Semitic. It described Gaza as, quote, a toxic dump. And at that point, it had slowly, just to give you one example, Piers, and your listeners, because they should have a sense of what this blockade looked like. Israel's explicit policy, was to keep Gaza on the precipice of economic catastrophe. That's how they described their policy. They prohibited baby chicks from entering Gaza. They prohibited chocolate from entering Gaza. They prohibited potato chips from entering Gaza. They prohibited any spices from entering Gaza. And it prohibited any exports from Gaza, except at some points, occasionally, things like strawberries. So what had happened to Gaza? It had, on the eve of 2007, it had the highest unemployment rate in the world. It was about 60% unemployed, 50% for the population as a whole, 60% for youth. The people in Gaza were left to languish and die, no past, no present, no future, to languish and die in a concentration camp. That was their prospect as of October 6, 2003. Excuse me, 2023. Sorry about that.
May I respond?
Well, I'll tell you what, yes, actually, on that point, Professor Dershowitz, you respond to that point briefly, if you could. And then I want to come back to Norman Finkelstein to move it on to settlement. So, Alan, just respond to what... respond to that suggestion, which has been cited by many people, that the conditions in Gaza, in the period that Norman Finkelstein has been referring to, have been described by many people as bordering on a concentration camp. And at the very least, a form of occupation where Israel wielded far too much control over what could come in and out of Gaza, including people.
Yeah, see, this is why I don't understand, because the same Emily girl in the last Piers debate that we watched did the same exact thing where she was like, Israel pulled out, we wanted nothing to do with that land. But it's like, why do you have checkpoints? Why are you controlling everything that goes in and out? Why are people not allowed to leave the Gaza Strip or go in and out? You say that you guys left that strip and you want nothing to do with it, but you control everything in the Gaza Strip. Y'all say you left, but you also control every single aspect of it, like food, medical supplies, how big the border is, how people can't expand. I mean, you guys know how we hear stories about an entire family with the same last name just got taken out by an Israeli strike. It's literally because they wouldn't allow any construction material to go in or out of the Gaza Strip. So people would just build on top of houses. So they would have a house, but then they would build more floors on top of the houses because they weren't able to expand throughout the Gaza Strip. So it's just like, if you guys really don't care about the Strip, why don't you let people expand? Why don't you let people have things like, you know, chocolate or potato chips? It literally doesn't make sense.
Well, they're right in the description that it was a toxic place. It was a toxic place because Hamas took over and because Hamas robbed the people of Gaza of their food. It took the material that was sent from Europe, from countries around the world, and took it away from the children and took it away from the hospitals, took it away from the schools, and gave it to their fighters to build 350 miles of tunnels. Imagine what could have been done with all the resources that had been sent to Gaza. There was plenty of food in Gaza, except that Hamas was using it. There was plenty of material to build hospitals in Gaza, but instead Hamas was using it. It's Hamas that turned it into a toxic, toxic place, when Israel, in fact,
there we go, the ending of this debate. Is it really a stream if you don't blame everything on Hamas? It's all Hamas's fault. Not Netanyahu, not Itamar Ben-Gvir, not the years of, you know, isolation and torture and displacement. Even before Hamas was established, it was still Hamas. You just didn't know.
Occupied it, actually occupied it. It was in much better shape than when Hamas took it over. And so it's Hamas's fault. Hamas turned Gaza into this horrible place. And let's remember, Israel has been prepared to give up Gaza over and over again. It tried desperately to give it back to Egypt during the Camp David. It tried desperately to allow for the 2007 Olmert plan. Gaza is given to a Palestinian state. The 2001 Bill Clinton plan, Gaza is given over. They rejected it. If it was a toxic concentration camp, the guards were not Israelis. The guards were Hamas people who were throwing gay people off the roof, who were murdering Palestinian Authority people, and who were denying women the right to live their lives decently. Yes.
Oh, yes, yes, yes. The Arab Muslim trope, of course. I would honestly rather be gay in Gaza than be Middle Eastern in Israel. I would rather be gay in Gaza than be Muslim as Israel. Do you want to know why you never see mainstream media go to the streets of Israel and just put a microphone in front of the face of Israelis? Do you want to know why all the spokespeople for Israelis and the Israeli government is always a trained media person? It's because Israelis themselves are a very nationalistic, racist, supremacist country. They believe that the land is theirs based off of some 2,000-year-old prophecy. But going beyond that, they're extremely racist towards black people. They even tried to sterilize Ethiopians for a minute, and they did. They're extremely racist to black Jews. And they also are extremely racist to Muslims, Arabs, and essentially anything that does not go with their supremacist ideology. So you want to tell me about what Hamas is going to do to a gay person, but you're not even going to acknowledge that your own state is like a America, but on fucking steroids. I'm not going to listen to you. It's insane. Go to Israel and put a microphone in front of the people and see what they say. Ask them what they think about Arabs.
Gaza was a terrible place. Completely the fault of Hamas.
Can we reach a point of agreement on the issue of settlements? I suspect we can. So Norman Finkelstein, I don't want to keep responding. I don't want you to keep responding to each other about that. What I would like you to do.
One sentence.
Well, listen,
allow me.
Oh, okay, give me one sentence, but then please address the issue of settlements.
One sentence. The United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, 1,000 humanitarian and economic organizations have all reached the same conclusion. It's very simple. The main cause of the disaster in Gaza is Israel's illegal blockade of that parcel of land. Full stop.
That's wrong. That's wrong. That's wrong. That's false.
He said full stop. Bro, Norman Finkelstein talks way too slow, but he's fire. What comes out of that mouth is fire. I just wish he could speed it up a little bit sometimes, but damn, that was fire.
False.
Who's wrong? Who's wrong? UNCTAD is
That's
wrong. The World Bank is wrong.
Blockade,
The International Monetary Fund is wrong. They're all wrong.
Yes.
Are they all anti-Semitic?
Yes,
Is that what's going on?
I didn't say that. They're wrong. I happen to know
So
more
why
about
are they
the
all
law
wrong?
than any of them. Because the blockade was completely lawful. It was designed to prevent the importation and then the use of rockets against Israel. It's perfectly lawful for a country to engage in a blockade. That is, you're not. Let me finish. You can't have a double. Look, Israel is exposed to a double standard, but we're not letting you impose a double standard on me. No, I'm going to finish my statement, and you're not going to interrupt me. So understand me. The military occupation was lawful. The blockade.
Waffle warfare, it's not me that's wrong, it's every humanitarian organization. Yeah, like, what do you say to that, honestly?
Was lawful. Every country has the right to defend itself from rockets, from terror tunnels, from people coming over the border, murdering and kidnapping people. Those are all lawful. I'm telling you that as an expert in international law and the law of war.
Okay.
If you want to dispute me, get an expert who knows something about international law.
Okay.
Not a polemicist like
Professor
you.
Dershowitz. Okay. Professor Dershowitz, just as a matter of fact, I teach the laws of war. I've been teaching it for the last 5 years. To my understanding,
you're biased.
Okay, Professor Dershowitz. Okay, Professor Dershowitz, let's agree. I'm completely ignorant. Let's take that as a point of departure. How does it come to be that every humanitarian and political body in the world has declared that the blockade of Gaza constitutes collective punishment and therefore is a violation, a breach of international law, a war crime under international law? How did that come to pass?
They're wrong.
How is it that
first of all, you're wrong.
They're all wrong.
No, you're not.
You're
not
wrong,
right.
Except
you're
Alan
not
Dershowitz.
right. No.
Except
you're wrong.
Sir,
you're wrong in describing.
Professor Dershowitz.
You're wrong in describing every group. There are many
name
groups.
Me one. Okay. Professor Dershowitz, name me one legal international legal body or human rights organization. Name me one. I'll take the pause. Name me one that says the blockade of Gaza is not collective punishment. Name me one.
The Lawfare Project in the United States.
The Lawfare Project. I said, name me one international legal or political body.
It is.
One.
It is.
Everybody's listening now.
Legal body.
Piers Morgan has a very large audience. Name me one international or legal or political body that says the blockade of Gaza is legal. Name me one.
It is legal, and every organization that I have been associated with, the Lawfare Project, the project run by a woman named Leitner, an international project, were all concluded that the blockade is legal. Also, the Israeli Supreme let me finish. The Israeli Supreme Court, which is above reproach and which is much fairer than the International Court of Justice, has also, with limits, has said that blockades designed to prevent the bringing of rockets to Israel is lawful. Also, use your common sense.
That's not bringing rockets to Israel is not the Gaza blockade. The Gaza blockade is a humanitarian blockade. What does that have to do with anything?
Possible reason would there be for allowing a group in Gaza, a group of Hamas, to send rockets without trying to blockade them from bringing the rockets in and building tunnels? Use your common sense. Of course it's unlawful. Okay. Every country in the world would do exactly the same as Israel did.
Listen, I think we've exhausted this part of the debate.
Material from being
I do want to.
Damn, when I tell you Alan Dershowitz looked like a dumbass in this section, it's an understatement. Alan Dershowitz not only did not respond to Norman Finkelstein's question and or claims, he continued to keep parroting Zionist talking points, which, baby, Zionist talking points are based off of nothing that's actually truthful. You're gonna look like a dumbass if you go in front of a scholar and you parrot Netanyahu and Itamar Ben-Gvir's talking points. You know what I mean? It's not gonna work out great for you. And we're seeing it here. The Zionist ideology and or propaganda or reasoning is not based out of fact. It's based out of feelings. It's based out of feelings and half-truths.
Before we run out of time, we only have about 5 minutes left, and I do want to get into settlements. And I'll start with you, Professor Finkelstein. The issue of settlements, I think, is pretty much indefensible. actually, what's been going on, and particularly in recent years on the West Bank. But what is your overview of the settlement issue?
My overview of the settlements, as in all topics, is what international law says. Under Article 49 of the Fourth Geneva Convention, it's illegal for an occupying power to transfer its population to occupied territory. Now, when that issue came before the International Court of Justice in July 2004, every single judge, including the American judge, Mr. Bergenthal, they all agreed on that one point. The settlements are illegal under international law. Now, under the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, those settlements constitute war crimes. So what we're talking about now, since the settlement activity began right after the June 1967 war, what we're talking about is a protracted war crime over a period of a half century. And that's sometimes missed. When we talk about what's happened to Gaza, we're talking about 2 decades. If you go back to the closure in 1990, we're talking about the martyrdom of a people over 3 decades. Those young men who burst the gates of Gaza on October 7th were born into, to use your phrase now, a toxic concentration camp. They were born into it. And that settlement activity, which under the Rome Statute is a war crime, that's been ongoing for a half century.
Okay, let me get Professor Dershowitz
Let me
to respond,
please.
Yes,
Let me
you can.
respond.
Yeah.
First of all, Finkelstein and Hamas regard Tel Aviv and Jerusalem as settlements. So you can't take them seriously about anything. They regard all of Israel as settlements. And yes, I disagree with settlements on the
Yeah, that's because they are. Newsflash, all of Israel is settlements. Why is that so surprising?
West Bank. I have since 1970 when I debated Noam Chomsky. I called for a 2-state solution. I agree with a military occupation designed to prevent rockets and prevent terrorism. But I disagree with civilian settlements. But the core point I want to mention
Are they war
is
crimes?
ultimately we've gotten to this point. Wait a second. No, of course not. They are not war crimes at all. They are disputes over what constitutes the UN Resolution 242.
But if the UN
which
says they're
allowed
illegal,
Israel,
the UN says they're illegal, where does that leave it?
the UN says a lot of things. The UN also called Israel Zionism racism. The UN has no authority to define international law.
Okay, everyone is wrong but him. Every single humanitarian organization, every single nonprofit, the UN, everyone's wrong. What can we say, y'all? Well, there's no winning with Alan Dershowitz. Everyone's just wrong. If you do not believe that Gaza equals terrorist equals you need to take them down, then you're just simply wrong. It does not matter how many backed organizations you're with or how much research you do or how smart you might be in this matter. You're always going to be wrong.
Law, the UN can give
all
advisory
15
opinions.
judges,
who does?
all
But let me
15
please
judges are the ICJ.
let me finish. So remember who appoints the justices. Countries appoint the justices. So when Lebanon appoints a justice, it's Hezbollah who's appointing the justice. The International Court of Justice is an illegitimate court. It is not a real court. But I want to get to the core point. What
Thomas
Finkelstein finally
Bergenthal,
says.
Thomas
Wait a minute. Let me
Bergenthal,
finish,
the
please.
American
Let me
judge,
finish.
said
Let
the
me
settlements
finish.
are illegal.
What Finkelstein is finally saying is that these people, he called them martyrs. I was at Beirut. I was at the Nova Music Festival.
Yeah, this man said even the ICJ is illegitimate. There's no way this guy's actually serious. He said, you know what? No, fuck the ICJ too. Fuck them all. Oh my God.
I saw the remnants of where a woman named Vivian Silver, a peacenik, who used to go over and bring Hamas and Gazan people to hospitals, was burnt to death. I saw where people were raped. There is no justification for collective rape. There is no justification for murdering a peacenik. This woman was probably murdered by the very people she brought to hospitals because they...
His source? Just trust me, bro. You're just gonna have to trust me.
They knew exactly where she lived and where the hospitals. It's an abomination to even suggest that any kind of martyrdom, dispute over land, dispute over anything, could justify what happened on October 7th. Shame on anybody who thinks that civilized human beings should be praised or even justified for doing what they did. I met a man whose son had been beheaded, and Hamas then took his head, brought it back to Gaza, put it on sale for $10,000, and this father had to bury his son without a head. That's what Hamas did. And not only Hamas, but people, ordinary...
Every single thing this man has said has been refuted on a scholarly level. And now that he has been completely refuted, he has called all these nonprofit organizations illegitimate. He has called the UN illegitimate. He's called the ICJ illegitimate. Now he's using anecdotal stories about what he allegedly personally saw happen to the victims of October 7th. And I'm not here to say something terrible didn't happen on October 7th. Like, yeah, obviously we know it was really bad. But when you start clamoring onto these like anecdotal truths that only exist in your brain and I have no way to verify it, I'm not going to sit down and believe you. And this goes for both sides of the matter. You know what I mean? Like, even if someone on the other side was like, hey, this is everything that I saw and I couldn't find any backed up evidence for it, then I would be like, you know, you always have to question things. You can't just believe anything anyone says. And it's a bit sad. He just lost all credibility here.
Civilians in Gaza came over the border and participated in these rapes and murders, and shame on anybody who doesn't unequivocally condemn it. There is no...
Please look at Norman's face. Norman's like, please get me the fuck out of here.
...justification for what happened on October 7th, no matter what the history is. The history is disputed, but I want to hear Norman Finkelstein say unequivocally, no matter what the history is, there is no justification for the massacres of October 7th.
Well, we'll end with Norman Finkelstein's response and answer that question. I think it's a legitimate question.
My response is exactly the same one I gave you the very first time I met you, Piers. There were atrocities, large atrocities, that occurred on October 7th. I think it's indisputable. You then asked me, would you consider it terrorism? I then replied to you, I think atrocities denote terrorism. However, I said I take the same attitude towards the perpetrators of those atrocities as the abolitionists in the United States took towards the Nat Turner Rebellion. Nat Turner...
So you justify them, so you praise them, so you glorify them, and you honor them. That's the reality.
Piers, can I finish?
Yeah.
Can I finish?
Yeah.
Nat Turner and the slave revolt committed horrible atrocities. The abolitionists said horrible things happened, but they never condemned
No, they
Nat
don't
Turner.
happen. They are perpetrated by people. You're justifying
what they
it.
did was,
Finkelstein,
allow me to
this
finish.
is the lowest point
Piers,
you've ever
please tell
gotten
them
to,
to stop.
and you've gotten to low points, but this is the lowest point you've gotten to, comparing these rapists and these murderers
well, I think
to abolitionists.
Alan, let him
is the
finish.
lowest point in your history.
Let him finish what he's trying to say.
Sure.
Thank you.
Let me have
By the way,
last word.
Nat Turner's rebellion, in Nat Turner's rebellion, they committed horrible atrocities, including beheading babies. That's a fact. However, the abolitionists...
You're justifying that.
They did
you're justifying that.
They did not... Please, Piers, can you please tell him to
I think
stop?
let him finish the point he's making, and then you respond.
Okay. Thank you so much. However, the abolitionists did not condemn the perpetrators. The abolitionists kept saying, we told you so. We told you so. We told you so. If you treat people like that, what happened with the slave revolt inevitably would happen. And I say, if you lock 2 million people in a concentration camp for 20 years, half of whom are children who were born into that concentration camp, don't react with shock and dismay and disbelief and indignation at what happened on October 7th. I have spent the last 20 years of my life studying what's been done to the people of Gaza. And each time I reread what I wrote, I'm more firm than ever before. I will not condemn those people, even as I acknowledge that massive, unspeakable atrocities occurred on October 7th.
Okay.
Damn, that had to be the best response that I've heard a person give to this question. I have chills all over my body. It's so important to acknowledge that what happened on October 7th was bad, but you have to more so acknowledge, like, how did we get there? How did we get to that point? I think Americans have so much empathy for dogs that are abused, you know what I mean? Animals that are abused, but then they see Palestinians and they're like, oh, how dare you do October 7th? But it's like, you would literally have more sympathy towards a dog that was abused its whole life than Palestinian people or Muslim people in the Middle East. And it's so sad. And no, I agree with you, Jorge. This was raw. This was raw. He hit the nail on the head. And you know what? I want to end on this note. I don't even want to know what Alan Dershowitz had to say personally. I don't know about y'all. This is why Norman Finkelstein does so freaking well in general media, because he does not allow his feelings to get in the way. And when you're doing work, when you're studying the atrocities that have happened to Palestinian people, it is incredibly hard to not allow your feelings to get in the way. Because when you read and when you study the atrocities that Palestinian people have gone through for virtually no good reason that makes any kind of sense, it's gut-wrenching. And going on a debate that's this big and put on a pedestal, and, like, you know, so many people are watching. I mean, this video alone has almost 600,000 views. So when you go on a panel like this, there's so many emotions running. You have to make your point. You're also going against someone like Piers, who claims he's centrist, but is definitely more Zionist leaning. You have to be able to give the message in a way where it lands well with the public. And Norman did such a good job of that. And it just, wow. All right, thoughts about this debate. Overall, I think Norman did an amazing job. I do think Alan Dershowitz did a great job at emphasizing how lacking Zionist ideology is and how it's based off of half-truths. I think Norman really did a complete mic drop. It was the best mic drop that I've seen on Piers to this day. Well, with that being said, thank you so much for watching my YouTube channel. My name is Ariana Jasmine. Please make sure you like, subscribe, comment for more videos like this, and we'll be back again later this week.